Greetings friends, my name is Pavel Stelmach and I'm glad to present for you the new episode of our daily wrap-up series. Today, Ukraine celebrates the Volunteer Day. I will try to explain a little. There is a word volunteer in English language. This is a person who voluntarily offers himself or herself for a service or undertaking, or a person who performs a service willingly and without pay, and also a person who enters the service voluntarily rather than through conscription or draft, especially for special or temporary service, rather than as a member of the regular army. It is precisely the people described by the last definition that we celebrate today. Do you know why today? Because on March the 14th, 2014, the first volunteers went to fight in Donbas, straight from the Maidan. A month before that, they fought for their own beliefs with the pro-Russian authorities in the center of Kiev. And in March, they went to the front to defend the country from a Russian attack. 9 years ago, at this time, the Russians were completing the annexation of Crimea. In a week, the State Duma will make a decision on the alleged annexation of Crimea. And in order to quickly forget about the peninsula, they started a war in Donbas. And if you listen to Putin's statements, at that time, you will hear that there are also military personnel in Crimea without identification marks. It is not known where they came from. And in Donbas, miners and tractor drivers came out to oppose the Kiev authorities. But in a few years, the Kremlin will already be handing out medals for the liberation of Crimea. And in Donbas, they will recognize that Russian personnel fought against the Ukrainians, not the locals. Therefore, look closely at the people who are rallying in your country. Very often it may be your neighbors, but Russians in disguise. It is especially necessary to be careful now, when hundreds of thousands of Russians have left, fleeing from mobilization. Among all this crowd, there are definitely FSB agents who will be used to shake up the situation. Do not believe me? Then I advise you to take a closer look at what happened in Moldova in the near future. Pro-Russian protests have already started there, and among the protesters there are a lot of athletic men who speak Russian well. Why is that? But I was distracted by something. After all, he was talking about volunteers, people who left their civilian professions for the sake of protecting the country.
People of different professions in the past with different life paths and stories, heroic warriors now, and the time will surely come when they will become Ukrainians winners. Ukrainian volunteers who, following the call of their hearts, stood up for the independence of our state, and they worthily defend Ukraine together with all the soldiers of our defense and security forces. Ukraine is grateful to everyone who felt that it's time to become a warrior. Ukraine is proud of everyone who gains victory for our country. Ukraine will always remember all its heroes who gave their lives for freedom. Glory to Ukrainian volunteers. Glory to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Facebook.
But it was not only in 2014 that volunteers went to the front line. In February 2022, thousands of Ukrainians all over the territory went to the military enlistment offices, the territorial defense, and the voluntary formations of a territorial community. They left their usual lives and have been protecting the country and all civilians from the Russian invasion for more than a year now. These people did not want to be in the military, they were forced to. By life and a mad neighbor next door. They were not learned war in academies, but in trenches and dugouts. Many of them will not return to their civilian jobs, because they will decide to go to military service. And some have already laid down their lives defending the country, and there are a lot of such brave people. Not all of them will be known to the public, but I would like to mention one of them, Alexander Matsievsky, hero of Ukraine, whose last words were "Glory to Ukraine." You may think that this is a unique case, but it is not. Because even after the video of his execution appeared on social networks, there were several theories about which of the Ukrainian fighters could have been on it. Because each of our defenders is a descendant of the Cossacks, who were not afraid of death, not afraid of the enemy. They simply went to fight for themselves, for their land and relatives. They did it hundreds of years ago. They do it even today, risking house and life. And I hope that today You too will remember the people who are currently in the army instead of a warm home. I do not want to belittle the achievements of the Ukrainian military volunteers, but not only Ukrainians went to the front line. Since February last year, Ukrainian IT workers have been successfully coping with Russian cyber attacks. Like the military, Russian hackers working for the government have not been able to complete the tasks, writes Bloomberg. Ukraine has been successful in cyber warfare for two main reasons. First, it began to prepare for attacks in advance. Secondly, the Russian authorities expected that the war in the broadest sense would end quickly and did not prepare for prolonged cyber attacks. I note that according to Security Service of Ukraine reports, attacks by Russian hackers in Ukraine have been going on for about 10 years, since 2014. The most famous of these is the 2017 NotPetya malware, which makes all files on the device inaccessible. NotPetya has spread beyond Ukraine. The damage from it is estimated at $10 billion. However, in recent months, Russian hackers have not been able to inflict serious damage on Ukraine. Experts attribute this to the fact that in cyberspace, as well as on the battlefield, the Russian authorities did not count on a protracted war.
We had a rather serious handicap at the beginning. They were counting on the cyber front to take Kyiv in 3 days. That is, they will bomb, they will do it, and they will deploy it, and that's it. And we will stand on our hind legs, and that's it. But it was not there. The global cyber community is a kind of guise in which even sport interest is very serious in this field. They simply gave a serious rebuff and gave a very tough counteroffensive in the First World Cyber War. And Russians simply do not have time to repel our attacks. Anything works for us. Vacuum cleaners, cameras, radio kettles, etc.
Moreover, Ukrainian hackers and IT experts now widely use internet technologies. For example, the Telegram e-Vorog, where every Ukrainian can transmit the coordinates of enemy war techniques, thanks to the fact that the mobile internet was working in the Kyiv region during the occupation. Our military could learn almost in real time about the entire movement of the occupying forces, and they stopped the columns. And we also stopped cyber attacks on the energy sector in this fall, in parallel with missile attacks. Targets like Ukraine's energy sector had been hardened to offensive cyber operations, largely due to joint Ukrainian allied efforts to shore up Ukrainian networks. For example, in April 2022, a cyber attack against Ukraine's energy sector using Indestroyer 2 and Caddy Viper malware was thwarted. Unlike similar attacks in previous years, to date, the collaboration continues as Ukraine formally joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's Cyber Defense Center in January 2023. This committed and unified response by allies and industry partners have bolstered Ukraine's cyber defenses and enabled them to resist Russian attacks, even in real time. Ukraine's ability to successfully mitigate the role of Russian Nexus cyber attacks stands as a model for successful defense that can be applied in future conflicts with adversarial nations who employ hybrid tactics. The collective defense of Ukraine by government, military, and cybersecurity and threat intelligence partners has almost certainly lessened the damage of cyber attacks in the war, reducing Russia's ability to achieve its strategic objectives. Another large number among Russian losses. 11 days ago, there were 150,000 losses of Russian personnel. Today, there are more than 160,000, and in addition to this, thousands of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and automotive equipment, dozens of airplanes, helicopters, anti-aircraft missiles, and multiple rocket launchers. The most powerful army in Europe could be created from the destroyed military potential of Russia, but it is now destroyed, and now it is already difficult to call the Russian army the second in the world, because despite its huge size, it does not have appropriate management. And that is why thousands of soldiers die during the capture of one city, Bakhmut. Because of this, Despite the huge army in the country, mobilization is announced, and if the losses continue, there will be more than one. But frankly, the Kremlin knows how to respond to new challenges. In particular, a bill with a proposal to change the conscription age has already been submitted. If now it is from 18 to 27, then it will be from 21 to 30 years. Probably there are not enough men at all, especially taking into account that the support for the war is the lowest among the young. That is why it is necessary to call older men into the army.
Противник
The enemy suffers significant losses in personnel every day, so he doesn't not stop taking measures to replenish them. Recently, in temporarily occupied Donetsk, the military commissariats received an instruction to clarify the personal credentials of reserve officers under the age of 65 inclusive, as well as soldiers, sergeants and warrant officers under the age of 50.
сержантів та прапорщиків запасу.
But another mobilization is not the only problem that Russian society will face. After all, among the Russian soldiers today, there are many representatives of the Wagner mercenary group, and these are people who were recruited mainly from prisons. These are men who were imprisoned for serious crimes, beatings, rapes, murders, and now most of them are free. At all, after Federal Penitentiary Service Director Arkady Gostyev reported that in 2022, for the first time in the modern history of Russia, there were no successful escapes from pre-trial detention centers and colonies. Do you know why? Because it's reasonless. However, the Russian media have repeatedly written about their soldiers who left the military troops, and now one will say how many of them were former prisoners. Soon we will hear that some unknown man in uniform attacked civilians in the regions bordering Ukraine, and more than once there will be skirmishes in the Russian rear between military personnel and former prisoners. Of course, the propagandist mass media will say that they are Ukrainian supporters, but in fact they are former prisoners who are not used to work, but used to robbing. And I think, though, that we'll deal with it, unless they will be caught again and sent to war again, because ordinary Russians want to go to the front line less and less.
But this resource is limited only by the willingness of Russians to go to die in Ukraine. With each passing day of bloody battles near Bakhmut and in general on the Eastern Front, such readiness among the Russians is becoming less and less. Under existing conditions, this resource will not be inexhaustible, and in the event of an increase in the technological capabilities of the armed force of Ukraine, losses in manpower and equipment will inevitably increase.
And let me remind you that the training of Ukrainian soldiers on German Leopard tanks is already coming to an end. Today, the Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki, said that the transfer of MiG-29 fighters to Ukraine could take place within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Tanks from Western partners will arrive within 2 to 3 weeks too. And then the losses of the Russians can be even greater if there is still room to increase them. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.